Welcome everyone to Unit 1 of the AAA module. I'm Mary, one of your AAA module leaders. This is a short video to give you an overview of what's covered in Unit 1. Unit 1 covers the following key concepts in auditing: the 5 elements of an assurance engagement, the 2 levels of assurance, the key requirements when conducting an audit, and the overall audit process. We will constantly refer to these key concepts throughout the AAA module and build on them as you progress throughout the module. Let's now summarise each of these concepts for you. This diagram shows the 5 elements of an assurance engagement. We'll go through the 5 elements using a common scenario, which would be an audit of a listed entity's financial statement. The first element is a 3-party relationship. The 3 parties are the responsible party, that is the party responsible for the financial statements, which would be the directors in our example. The intended user of the financial statements, say the shareholders, and the practitioner, that is the auditor of the financial statements. This 3-party relationship underpins the purpose of an audit, which simply put is to increase the confidence of users in the financial statements by having an independent party check them. The second element of an assurance engagement is the underlying subject matter. In our example, this would be the listed entity's financial statements. The third element is suitable criteria. So if the financial statements are the subject matter being audited, then the suitable criteria would be the International Financial Reporting Standards, which the auditor would use to check the financial statements to and determine whether they are materially correct. The fourth element is evidence. The auditor needs to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. This evidence is necessary to enable the auditor to form an opinion over the financial statements. The fifth and final element of an assurance engagement is the assurance report. So after all the audit work is done and sufficient appropriate audit evidence is obtained, the auditor will issue the independent auditor's report on the financial statements. Assurance engagements are divided into 2 types: reasonable assurance engagements, which are audits, and limited assurance engagements, which are reviews. Using our early example of an audit of a listed entity's financial statements, it is important to note from the outset that an auditor cannot provide absolute 100% assurance that the financial statements are materially correct. The highest level of assurance that an auditor could provide is reasonable assurance. The higher the level of assurance, the more evidence required by the assurance practitioner to be able to express an opinion or form a conclusion. So you can see from the diagram that an audit would require more work and the need to gather more evidence than a review. Now remember the overall purpose of an audit. So the more confidence the users expect from the financial statements, the higher the level of assurance that will be required and therefore more audit work required. This level of confidence is also reflected in the form and wording of the assurance practitioner's report. An audit of the financial statements will express a positive opinion, which means in the audit report it will state, in our opinion, the financial statements are in accordance with IFRS, etc. As less assurance is provided in a review engagement, the review report on financial statements will express a negative conclusion. That is, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that the financial statements are not in accordance with IFRS, etc. Note the fundamental difference here. An audit results in the expression of an opinion, whereas in a review, it results in a conclusion. Now, with respect to related services, such as an agreed upon procedures engagement, no assurance is provided, and therefore this is not part of assurance engagements. Related services are discussed towards the end of the AAA module. There are 5 key requirements when conducting an audit. The first is ethics, When conducting an audit, the auditor needs to comply with relevant ethical requirements, including those that relate to independence. Ethical requirements are discussed in detail in Unit 2. The second requirement is that the auditor must plan and perform an audit with professional skepticism. Professional skepticism is an attitude that includes having a questioning mind, being alert to conditions that may indicate possible misstatement, and critically assessing audit evidence. The third requirement when conducting an audit is that the auditor needs to exercise professional judgment. Interpreting the requirements of the International Auditing Standards and making informed decisions throughout the audit can only be made with the application of appropriate knowledge and experience. It therefore makes sense that for areas which are greater risk and often more complicated in audit, you would assign more experienced staff who would have the required knowledge and experience. For the auditor to be able to express an appropriate opinion or conclusion, the fourth requirement is necessary. Sufficient appropriate audit evidence will need to be obtained to allow the auditor to express an opinion. Sufficient means, does the auditor have enough evidence to be able to express an opinion? And with respect to appropriate, is the evidence that has been obtained both relevant and reliable? By relevant, we mean that the evidence gathered is directly related to what the auditor is testing for. The evidence needs to also be reliable. Obtaining evidence from clients' internal documents is less reliable than external sources. For example, sales invoices, which are internally generated, are less reliable than a signed delivery docket by a customer to show that the sale had actually taken place. Note that the evidence needs to be sufficient and appropriate for the auditor to be able to express an opinion. It would be pointless if the auditor had enough evidence, but it wasn't from a reliable source, and vice versa. Remember that this key requirement when conducting an audit is sufficient and appropriate audit evidence and audit risk. We'll now discuss audit risk. Simply put, audit risk is the risk that the auditor expresses an incorrect opinion. Obviously, that would be a very serious concern, hence why auditors always aim to keep audit risk as low as possible. Note, however, that it's not possible to eliminate audit risk entirely, because as mentioned earlier, an audit engagement provides reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, and therefore the auditor would not test 100% of the transactions or amounts that make up the entire financial statements. Audit risk is shown as follows in the audit risk model and is a function of three factors: inherent risk and control risk, which are the two elements of the risk of material misstatements, and detection risk. These concepts will be discussed in more detail in Unit 3. The final key requirement when conducting an audit is to conduct an audit in accordance with the International Auditing Standards. It's important to note that to properly apply the auditing standards, an auditor needs to understand their entire text, not just the mandatory components. Last but not least, it's important to recognise that audit is a process. The main phases of the audit can be illustrated as follows: from pre-engagement activities to planning to testing and then completing the audit. Note that the risk assessment continues throughout the audit. As audit work is performed, new risks may be identified that the auditor was previously unaware of and therefore now need to be addressed. Units 2 to 10 of the AAA module follows the audit process from pre-engagement phase right through to finalising the audit and issuing the auditor's report. So that sums up our overview of Unit 1. If you have any further questions regarding Unit 1, please post them on the discussion board. Thank you for watching this video, and look out for other overview videos for other units in the AAA module. We wish you all the very best of luck in your studies.